Shalom uvracha from Yerushalayim, Ir HaKodesh. We are privileged this evening to study together in our second Haftarah series, the Haftarah, the prophetic reading of Parashat Vayeira, taken from the 4th chapter of the book of Kings 2, Perek Dalid of Melachim Bet. A way of remembering that is that Parashat Vayeira is the 4th parasha of the Torah. The book of Melachim is the 4th book of the books of the prophets, Yoshua, Shofatim, Shmuel, and Melachim. And the chapter of the Haftarah is chapter 4. So okay, we can remember now. If anybody asks you which chapter is the Haftarah from, we have it. In our Haftarah, there seems to be a special emphasis on the Torah value of modesty and privacy. If one carefully reads and studies our Haftarah, one will see the urgency of tzniut, the urgency of modesty applied to the miraculous ways of God. There is a description in the Haftarah of miracles, but the miracles are connected to some level of privacy and modesty. As you may recall, our Haftarah begins with a very moving story of a suffering widow. V'isha achat min sheven anavim tzaka el Elisha. She's crying, she's screaming to the prophet. The moving story of a suffering widow whose children are about to be snatched away from her due to the financial pressure of a very cruel creditor. When she turns to the prophet, when she turns to Elisha for help, he asks her if she has any available resources in her home. She replies by saying, she explains to Elisha that she has nothing in the whole house, with the exception of one small jug of oil. Ki'im asuch shemen, a drop of oil, a little jug of oil. Elisha says, oh, fine. He tells her to go out and to borrow vessels from all the neighbors. And somehow, miraculously, the oil will be able to fill all of the vessels. As many vessels as you bring into the house from the neighbors, that little jug of oil will fill them all. Please read with me the 4th sentence of our Haftarah, Perek Dalid, Pasuk Dalid. And I quote, Uvat v'sagart hadelet. Uvat v'sagart hadelet. Elisha tells her, after you borrow the vessels, go into the house, v'sagart hadelet, and close the door. Shut the door. V'sagart hadelet ba'adeich u'ba'ad banayich. Shut the door. Close the door behind you and behind your children. And then v'yatzakt al kol ha'kelim ha'eleh. And then pour all the oil on all of the vessels. So why is the emphasis on closing the door? Why is that part of the prophetic message here? Why does Elisha insist? Go to the house, get the vessels from the neighbors, and then close the door and come in and start pouring. Rashi comments, Kivod hanes hu lavo be'etznea. Out of respect for the miracle, it should be done privately. Close the door. We read in sentence 5, for those following in the text, we read in sentence 5 how she carries out this teaching. Vatisgor adelet. Once again, a second time now. Vatisgor, she comes She does what she's told, and she closes the door. Vatizgar hadelet ba'adah uva'ad baneha. She closes the door behind her and her children. This world seems to be a world where God works behind closed doors. God works in secret and private ways. Often, the public fanfare detracts from this godly plan. In an almost exact repetition of this same phenomenon, we read later, there are two miraculous stories in the Haftarah, right? One at the beginning of the Haftarah is a story about the never-ending oil. And then, the very famous story, I believe, of how Elisha revives the child. Remember that story? Remember the Shunamite woman? The Isha HaGedolah, the woman of Shunem, who at already at an advanced age didn't have any children, and together with her husband were so kind and hospitable to Elisha, he gives them a special blessing. A year later, they're blessed with a child. And the Haftarah describes how, unfortunately, at a certain point, if the child grew up, the child was in the field and died. And we read almost the exact words at a later point in the Haftarah. We read in the second miraculous story of our Haftarah reading, the story of how Elisha revives the dead son of the Shunamite woman. If you will please follow in sentence Lamed Gimel, sentence 33 of this chapter. Elisha enters the room to make efforts to pray and to revive the child. Vayavo, he comes into the room, and what does he do? He closes the door. Vayavo vayizgar hadelet ba'ad shnehem. He's only in the room together with this deceased child, right? Vayitpalel el Hashem, and then he prays to God. Elisha enters the room, shuts the door behind him, because the miracle of God will take place in privacy and in secrecy. Even when the distinguished Shunamite woman, remember when she placed the deceased child, remember when the child passes away, you know where she puts the child? She puts the child on the bed of Elisha, right? They had provided him with an attic apartment, and they gave him a special bed and a table and a chair and a light. She took the child and she put her son on the bed of Elisha. And again in the Haftarah, we read that when the distinguished Shunamite woman placed her deceased child on the bed of the prophet Elisha, look at sentence 21. We read, Vatizgar ba'ado vatetseh. She puts the child on the bed, she closes the door, and she leaves. It seems to me that there's a theme in the Haftarah here. Maybe an insight into the special level of how the miracles of God take place. Furthermore, in the Haftarah, we read of how before Elisha arrives in the house of the Shunamite woman, he first sends his attendant. His name is Gehazi. He first sends Gehazi ahead with his special mish'anet, with a special staff, to revive the child. But Gehazi is unsuccessful in doing so. Now there's an entire literature, there really is an entire literature, on why is it? I mean, he sent Gehazi, so why couldn't Gehazi revive the child? Many, many responses. There are several approaches in rabbinic literature, but I would like to share what Rashi writes. It's reflected in Midrashic literature also. Rashi, in his commentary to sentence 29, discusses one of the approaches wherein the failure of Gehazi is described as being connected to the fact that Gehazi perhaps didn't understand the concept of closing doors. You know what Gehazi did? He was running back to the town of Shunem with the special mish'anet, right? He had the special staff of Elisha. Elisha told him, remember? Elisha told him, just don't talk to anyone. Go straight. Go straight to the house. And he seemingly did not listen. And just the opposite. Everybody he met, he said, you know where I'm going? I'm going to, you see this special staff? I'm going to revive a dead child. I'm going to do Tchiyat HaMeitim. Oh, that's the opposite of the theme of this. Yeah, it's in the wrong, that's the antithesis of this teaching. He told people on the way to Shunem that he was on the way to Tchiyat HaMeitim. Elisha had instructed him not to talk to anyone on the way. Don't answer them. Don't have anything. Just go. In order that he shouldn't brag about the great miracle. But unfortunately, Gehazi didn't receive that message probably. He didn't understand that you have to close the door sometimes because God's miraculous ways are often done only in secrecy and in privacy. And as Rashi writes, Ve'ein zeh kivod hanes lihitalel bo misha ba'al yado. Person shouldn't brag about the miracles that are taking place with them or through them. V'hu, says Rashi, Gehazi, lo asakein. He refused to follow this teaching. Ella l'chol hasho'alo. Anyone where are you going, Gehazi? Who omer, Rabbi, shlachani, my master sent me, lachiot et hamet. I'm going to revive the dead. That's the opposite of closing one's doors. In Midrashic literature, specifically in Midrash Tanhuma on Shemot, chapter 31, elsewhere as well, the rabbis contrast the first set of tablets of the Ten Commandments to the second set of the tablets of the Ten Commandments. We had two different luchot, correct? What happened to the first ones?
Smashed.
They're broken, right? And the second ones? They endure. So why is it? Why is it that the first ones, of course, there's a technical explanation, correct? Because the Jewish people were involved in the sin of the golden calf. But the rabbis in the Midrashic literature see it a little differently. The first revelation at Sinai was a revelation, as they call it here in the Midrash, Haluchot Harishonot Al Shenitnu Befumbe. They're like very loud, very pronounced. The first set of tablets were given with, fire and thunder, smoke, lightning, very loud way. The second tablets, very, very private, right? As Rashi writes in his commentary to Exodus 34, 3 to Perak Lamed Dalet Pasuk Gimel of Shemot, where God says to Moshe, the second set would be a private revelation. Ish lo ya'aleh imach. Gam ish al yirah, but nobody's there. It's private. It's a sort of a closed door revelation. These are the luchot that ultimately last. In the language of Rashi, Harishonot, the first set of tablets, Al Yidei Shahayu, V'tshuot, V'kolot, loud, pronounced. They're broken. They don't make it. And as the Midrash says, and Rashi paraphrases, Ein lecha midah yafa min hatziniut. There is no greater value than the value of privacy, secrecy, and modesty. May we all learn the proper lessons of when and how to close the doors. And through that lesson, may God open for each one of us all the doorways to good health, to happiness, to contentment, and to success. Thank you so much for listening.
Rabbi Machlis, it's important to mention this week's Parshat Vayeira.